The alien jungle pressed against Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen like a living thing, its purple-tinted canopy filtering the harsh light of Kepler 442b's twin suns into an otherworldly twilight. Sweat pooled beneath his tactical gear despite the suit's cooling systems, and the humid air tasted of copper and ozone. Somewhere in the distance, the distinctive whine of Zephyrian energy weapons echoed through the twisted trees. Chen pressed himself deeper into the hollow of a massive root system, his rifle steady in his hands. The weapon felt familiar and reassuring, a heavily modified M4A7 that had been upgraded for off-world operations. Unlike the energy-based weapons favored by most galactic species, humans still preferred the reliable kinetic impact of good old-fashioned bullets. The other alien races found this primitive and amusing. Chen had stopped finding their opinions amusing after the third planet fell to Zephyrian expansion. Through his earpiece, he heard the steady breathing of his team. SEAL Team 7 had been inserted on Kepler 442b 3 days ago with a simple mission: locate and extract Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a xenobotanist who had been studying the planet's unique ecosystem when the Zephyrians launched their surprise attack. The blue-skinned reptilian race had been expanding aggressively through this sector, claiming planets for their empire with ruthless efficiency. What made it worse was that the Galactic Council had essentially written off human resistance. Humanity was still considered a junior species barely a century into space travel. The established races, the elegant Altarians, the technologically superior Vorthon, the ancient Keepers, all viewed human military doctrine as crude and outdated. Energy shields and plasma weapons were the mark of civilized warfare. Humans still relied on explosives, projectile weapons, and what the Council termed barbaric close-quarters combat. Chen adjusted his position slightly, scanning the jungle through his enhanced optics. The Zephyrians had superior technology, better shields, more advanced weapons. What they didn't have was patience, or the ability to sit perfectly still for hours while insects the size of house cats crawled over their gear. "Alpha, this is Bravo," whispered Petty Officer Rodriguez through the comm. "Got movement 2 clicks northwest. Looks like a patrol." Chen clicked his acknowledgement once. Radio silence was crucial. The Zephyrians had excellent signal detection, but they relied heavily on their technology. They never learned to truly listen to the jungle itself. The mission had gone sideways almost immediately. Intelligence suggested Dr. Mitchell was being held at a research facility in the planet's northern continent. What they found instead was a full Zephyrian military installation, with over 300 soldiers and enough firepower to level a small city. The extraction had become a rescue operation, and the rescue operation had become a survival mission. But Chen wasn't ready to give up. None of them were. That was the thing about SEALs, they didn't leave people behind. It didn't matter that Dr. Mitchell was a civilian scientist who had ignored evacuation orders. It didn't matter that the Galactic Council had already declared the planet a total loss. It didn't matter that Command had stopped responding to their check-ins 12 hours ago. Through the undergrowth, Chen caught a glimpse of blue skin and the distinctive angular armor of Zephyrian soldiers. The patrol moved with confidence, their energy weapons humming softly. They weren't expecting resistance. According to their intelligence, all human forces had been evacuated or eliminated. Chen smiled grimly. Human intelligence had always been underestimated by the galactic community. While other species relied on sophisticated sensor networks and AI analysis, humans had developed something more valuable: intuition backed by experience. Every member of SEAL Team 7 had spent years learning to read environments, to understand patterns of behavior, to think like their enemies. The Zephyrian patrol passed within 10 meters of Chen's position. He could have reached out and touched the trailing soldier. Instead, he remained motionless, counting heartbeats, measuring distances. The aliens moved with the mechanical precision of a species that had conquered dozens of worlds through technological superiority. But technology made them predictable. As the patrol disappeared into the jungle, Chen allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Phase 1 was complete. For the past 3 days, his team had been conducting what the manuals called environmental reconnaissance. What Chen called it was simpler. They were learning how to hunt Zephyrians. The aliens had patterns. They rotated patrols every 4 hours. They relied on energy scanners that had trouble penetrating the planet's mineral-rich soil. They communicated on predictable frequencies. Most importantly, they had never faced an enemy that specialized in asymmetric warfare. "Alpha, this is Charlie," came another whisper. Petty Officer Kim was positioned near the facility's eastern approach. "Confirm visual on package. Second floor, northwest corner. Heavy guard presence." Chen felt a surge of adrenaline. Dr. Mitchell was alive. Now they just had to figure out how to get her out of a fortified position, defended by an overwhelming enemy force. The smart play would be to call for backup, request a full marine assault, or coordinate with the Navy for orbital support. But the nearest human fleet was 3 systems away, and the Zephyrians would have Dr. Mitchell moved or eliminated long before any cavalry arrived. Chen checked his watch. In 6 hours, the planet's smaller sun would set, creating a brief period of near-total darkness before the larger sun's light became dominant. The Zephyrians, like most species, had excellent night vision technology, but they had never learned to fight in true darkness the way humans had. He keyed his comm with a single click, the signal for his team to begin Phase 2. Somewhere above the planet's atmosphere, Lieutenant Sarah Phoenix Torres was waiting in her A-10 Thunderbolt II, the ancient aircraft retrofitted for space operations. The Air Force had wanted to retire the platform decades ago, but combat experience had proven that sometimes older, simpler technology was exactly what a mission required. The Galactic Council would never understand what was about to happen. They saw war as a civilized exchange of superior technology, fought at long range with minimal casualties among professional soldiers. They had never witnessed human warfare at its most fundamental level, desperate, personal, and absolutely without mercy. Chen settled deeper into his hiding spot and began to wait. In 6 hours, the Zephyrians would learn why humanity had earned its place among the stars not through superior technology, but through an unshakable refusal to abandon their own. Dr. Sarah Mitchell pressed her face against the energy bars of her cell, trying to catch a glimpse of the alien landscape beyond the facility's walls. 3 days of captivity had taught her more about Zephyrian psychology than 6 months of academic study. They were methodical, logical, and completely convinced of their own superiority. It was a weakness she was beginning to understand how to exploit. The facility hummed with activity. Through the translucent walls, she could see Zephyrian soldiers moving in precise formations, their blue-scaled faces expressionless behind tactical visors. They had captured her research station with overwhelming force, but they seemed genuinely puzzled by her presence. A lone human scientist staying behind when all others had fled. It didn't fit their understanding of human behavior. Commander Vexithera had interrogated her personally. His questions focused entirely on human military capabilities. Where were the fleet positions? What were Earth's defensive strategies? How many colonies had significant military installations? Sarah had answered truthfully, she had no idea. Xenobotany rarely intersected with military intelligence, but the Zephyrian commander didn't believe her. In his experience, all species organized themselves along logical military hierarchies. Scientists were connected to command structures. Civilians had strategic value. The idea that humans might operate with genuine independence, that a university researcher might simply refuse evacuation orders because her work was too important, was incomprehensible to him. Sarah had spent her interrogation time studying her captors. The Zephyrians were reptilian humanoids averaging 7 feet in height, with thick-scaled skin that provided natural armor. Their technology was impressive. Energy weapons that could cut through most known materials, personal shields that deflected kinetic impacts, and communication systems that operated on quantum entanglement principles. What fascinated her was how completely they relied on that technology. When a power fluctuation had briefly disabled the facility's systems on her second day, she watched the guards react with something approaching panic. They seemed genuinely uncomfortable operating without their constant technological support. Through her cell's energy barrier, Sarah could hear the facility's communication systems. The Zephyrians made no attempt to hide their conversations. Why would they? A primitive human couldn't possibly understand their tactical discussions. Unfortunately for them, Sarah had spent the past year learning their language for her research. Academic preparation had suddenly become a tactical advantage. What she learned wasn't encouraging. The Zephyrian force was part of a larger invasion fleet. Kepler 442b was just the first target in a systematic campaign to eliminate human presence from this entire star system. After securing the planet, They would move on to the mining colonies in the asteroid belt, then the terraforming stations around the gas giant. But there was something else in their communications, a note of concern that Sarah found intriguing. Several patrols had failed to report in on schedule. Equipment had been found abandoned in the jungle. Sentries had reported strange sounds in the night, sounds their sensors couldn't identify or locate. Sarah smiled despite her situation. She knew those sounds. Growing up in rural Montana, she had learned to recognize the approach of apex predators. The Zephyrians were about to discover that humans could be very good at hunting when properly motivated. A commotion in the corridor drew her attention. 2 guards were escorting a maintenance technician toward the facility's power core. The tech was obviously nervous, his scaled hands trembling as he carried his equipment. Sarah caught fragments of their conversation. Something about unexplained power drains and possible sabotage. The humans had been here. Sarah was certain of it. She had worked with enough military personnel during her time on frontier colonies to recognize their methods. Small acts of sabotage, carefully timed to create confusion and drain resources. The Zephyrians were responding exactly as humans would want them to, increasing patrols, running more frequent diagnostics, burning through power reserves trying to identify threats that might not even exist. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah noticed increasing activity in the facility. More patrols were being dispatched. Communication traffic was becoming more urgent. Commander Vexithara himself had visited the communications center 3 times in the past hour. The Zephyrians were professional soldiers, but they were operating in an environment they didn't understand. Against an enemy that refused to follow conventional tactical doctrine, they expected human resistance to come in the form of orbital bombardments or massed infantry assaults. They were prepared for sophisticated electronic warfare or coordinated fleet actions. They weren't prepared for humans who had learned to fight like ancient hunters. Sarah had studied enough military history to understand what was happening. Somewhere in the jungle, a small team of human special forces was conducting what the textbooks called psychological warfare. They were making the Zephyrians afraid, not of human technology or superior numbers, but of the dark spaces between their sensors, the blind spots in their surveillance, the moments when their perfect technology couldn't tell them what was lurking just beyond their perception. A new sound echoed through the facility, the distinctive whine of atmospheric craft engines. Sarah pressed closer to the energy barrier, straining to see. Through the facility's transparent walls, she could make out the angular shapes of Zephyrian interceptors rising from landing pads, their engines glowing with contained plasma. The aliens were scrambling air support. Something had them seriously worried. As if in response to her thoughts, the facility's emergency lighting activated. Red strobes bathed the corridors in crimson light, while alert klaxons echoed through the structure. Zephyrian soldiers rushed past her cell, moving with the sharp urgency of troops responding to immediate threat. Sarah caught fragments of shouted orders. Perimeter breach. Lost contact with Patrol 7. Unknown aircraft detected in upper atmosphere. Unknown aircraft. Sarah's heart raced. The human evacuation had been complete officially, but special forces operated by different rules. If there was a rescue mission in progress, it would be small, precise, and utterly ruthless in its execution. Through the chaos, Sarah heard a sound that made her breath catch. It was faint, almost lost in the facility's alarms, but unmistakable to anyone who had grown up around military bases. The distant roar of turbofan engines, the distinctive sound of human atmospheric craft. The Zephyrians had superior technology, overwhelming numbers, and complete control of the planet's surface. What they didn't have was experience fighting humans who had decided that technology and numbers didn't matter. Humans who had learned to wage war with patience, cunning, and an absolute refusal to leave their people behind. Sarah stepped back from the energy barrier and began to prepare. If the cavalry was coming, she needed to be ready to move. The Zephyrians were about to learn a hard lesson about underestimating a species that had clawed its way to the stars through sheer, bloody-minded determination. Lieutenant Sarah Phoenix Torres felt the familiar weight of her flight suit as she performed her pre-flight checks in the cramped cockpit of her A-10C Thunderbolt II. The aircraft hung in the cargo bay of the stealth frigate UES Defiance, 30,000 kilometers above Kepler 442b's surface. Around her, the ship's crew moved with quiet efficiency, Preparing for what everyone knew was likely a one-way mission. The A-10 had been retired from Earth's atmosphere decades ago, considered obsolete in an age of energy weapons and force field technology, but Phoenix had argued successfully for its revival in the special operations community. Sometimes the old ways were the best ways, especially when dealing with enemies who had never seen them before. "Phoenix, this is Control," came the voice of Commander Hayes through her headset. "Final systems check complete. You are go for drop in T-minus 10 minutes. Copy, Control. Phoenix is ready to fly." She ran through her weapons checklist one more time. The GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon had been modified to fire depleted uranium rounds at hypersonic velocity, ancient technology enhanced with modern material science. Her hardpoints carried a mix of conventional ordnance and experimental kinetic penetrators designed specifically for Zephyrian energy shields. The mission parameters were insane by any rational military standard. Insertion into hostile airspace with no air support, no backup, and no extraction plan. The Zephyrians had complete air superiority over the planet, with interceptors and surface-to-air systems that could track and destroy conventional human aircraft before they even entered the atmosphere. But the A-10 wasn't conventional. It was ugly, slow, and built around a gun that belonged in a museum. It was also the most survivable aircraft humanity had ever produced, designed by engineers who understood that sometimes the best technology was the simplest technology. Phoenix had spent the past week studying Zephyrian tactical doctrine with the ship's intelligence team. The aliens fought clean, precise wars with minimal collateral damage and maximum efficiency. They used sophisticated sensor networks to maintain complete battlefield awareness. Their interceptors were fast, agile, and equipped with weapons that could vaporize most human aircraft in a single shot. What they didn't expect was an enemy pilot who had trained specifically to fight while wounded, to navigate without sensors, and to complete missions in aircraft that any sane military would have scrapped decades ago. "Phoenix, we're getting updated intel from the ground team," Commander Hayes continued. "SEAL Team 7 confirms Dr. Mitchell is alive and located in the primary facility. They've been conducting harassment operations for the past 6 hours. Enemy air assets are currently engaged in search patterns looking for ground-based threats." Phoenix smiled grimly. The SEALs were doing exactly what they did best, making a superior enemy focus on the wrong threats. While Zephyrian interceptors searched the jungle for human special forces, they would be completely unprepared for an attack from above. "Control, requesting permission to modify flight plan," Phoenix said. "If the ground team has been raising hell, the enemy air defense network is going to be at maximum alertness. I want to come in low and fast using the planet's magnetic field to mask my approach." There was a pause. "Phoenix, that approach puts you well outside safe parameters. The magnetic interference will knock out most of your avionics." "Copy that, Control. The A-10 was designed to fly with half its systems shot off. I'll manage." Commander Hayes' voice carried a note of resignation.
"Roger, Phoenix."
"You are cleared for modified approach. Give 'em hell." The cargo bay doors began to open, revealing the blue-green curve of Kepler 442b below. Phoenix felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before combat. This was what she had trained for her entire career, the moment when human ingenuity and determination faced off against superior technology and overwhelming odds. "Defiance, this is Phoenix. Beginning drop sequence." She triggered the release clamps and felt her aircraft fall free of the frigate's artificial gravity. The A-10 dropped like a stone toward the planet's atmosphere, its angular profile cutting through the vacuum with deceptive grace. Phoenix fired the engines and pulled into a steep dive, using the planet's gravity well to build velocity. The first phase of her approach was textbook, a high-speed atmospheric entry that would look like meteor debris to most sensor systems. The Zephyrians would detect her eventually, but hopefully not until she was already committed to her attack run. As she hit the upper atmosphere, Phoenix felt the aircraft begin to shake. The A-10's airframe groaned under the stress but held together. The engineers who had designed this machine had understood that sometimes the difference between mission success and failure was simply refusing to brake when everything went wrong. At 15,000 meters, her sensors began picking up Zephyrian air defense activity. Energy signatures bloomed across her threat display as the alien interceptors adjusted their search patterns. They knew something was happening, but they couldn't quite identify what. Phoenix adjusted her approach vector, diving toward the planet's northern polar region where the magnetic field was strongest. As she entered the interference zone, her electronic systems began failing one by one. Navigation went dark, followed by targeting computers, then communications. It didn't matter. Phoenix had memorized the terrain maps and approach vectors. She had calculated fuel consumption and ammunition expenditure, down to the last round. Most importantly, she had learned to trust her instincts over her instruments. At 5,000 meters, she leveled off and began her approach run. The Zephyrian facility appeared on the horizon, a cluster of angular structures surrounded by defensive positions. Energy discharges lit up the jungle around the perimeter as ground forces engaged in running firefights with the SEAL team. Phoenix activated her targeting systems manually, feeling the familiar vibration as the GAU-8 cannon began to spool up. 7 barrels, each capable of firing depleted uranium rounds at 3,500 rounds per minute. The Zephyrians had never seen anything like it. Time to show these lizards how humans do close air support, she muttered, pulling into her attack dive. The first Zephyrian interceptor appeared on her starboard side, moving fast and firing energy bursts that sizzled through the air around her aircraft. Phoenix rolled left, using the A-10's surprising maneuverability to avoid the worst of the incoming fire. One energy blast clipped her port wing, but the aircraft's redundant systems kept her flying. She lined up on the facility's main defensive tower and squeezed the trigger. The sound of Phoenix's GAU-8 cannon was unlike anything the Zephyrians had ever heard. While their energy weapons produced clean, precise bursts of contained plasma, the A-10's main gun was pure industrial violence, a continuous roar of metal and destruction that sent depleted uranium rounds downrange at hypersonic velocity. Commander. Vexithara stood in the facility's command center, watching his defensive tower disintegrate under the human aircraft's assault. The structure's energy shields flared and died as hundreds of kinetic rounds overwhelmed their capacity. Within seconds, the tower was reduced to twisted metal and sparking electronics. "What is that weapon?" he demanded, his scaled hands gripping the command console. "Our intelligence indicated human aircraft used energy-based armaments." His tactical officer, Lieutenant Zexneal, was frantically working his sensor station. "Commander, the aircraft is using primitive kinetic projectiles. Massive rate of fire, extremely high velocity. Our shields are not calibrated for this type of attack." Vexithara felt a chill run down his spine. In 3 decades of military service, fighting across dozens of worlds, he had never encountered weapons that could simply overwhelm defensive systems through brute force. It was inefficient, wasteful, and utterly devastating. The human aircraft, if it could even be called that, was unlike anything in Zephyrian tactical databases. Where their interceptors were sleek and graceful, this machine was angular and brutal. It moved with the mechanical precision of industrial equipment, built for function rather than elegance. "Sir, Interceptor Squadron Alpha is moving to engage," reported the communications officer. "They request permission to use maximum firepower." "Granted," Vexithara replied immediately. "Destroy that aircraft at all costs." Through the command center's viewing ports, he could see his interceptors closing on the human aircraft. Their weapons were state-of-the-art plasma cannons, capable of vaporizing most known materials. Against the primitive human machine, they should have been overwhelmingly effective. The first interceptor opened fire at optimal range, sending brilliant energy bursts toward the human aircraft. Vexithara watched with satisfaction as several shots found their target, causing visible damage to the machine's hull and wings. But the aircraft didn't go down. Instead, it continued its attack run with mechanical determination, as if minor damage was simply irrelevant to its function. The human pilot, and Vexithara, was beginning to suspect there was indeed a living being controlling this mechanical monster, rolled the aircraft into an impossible angle and returned fire. The interceptor pilot, flight leader Kexthar, was a veteran with over 50 combat missions. He had destroyed human fighters before during the initial invasion phases. They were fast and maneuverable, but their energy weapons were inferior and their armor was pathetically thin. This aircraft was different. When his plasma bursts struck its hull, they seemed to simply burn away sections of armor without affecting the machine's core systems. The human aircraft absorbed damage that should have been catastrophic and continued functioning. Kexthar pulled into a tight turn, trying to get behind the human aircraft for a clean shot. As he maneuvered, he caught sight of the machine's main weapon, a massive rotating cannon that seemed to take up most of the aircraft's forward section. It was crude, primitive, and absolutely terrifying in its mechanical simplicity. The cannon swiveled toward his position and fired. Kexthar had milliseconds to process what was happening. Instead of energy bursts, the human weapon fired solid projectiles, thousands of them in a continuous stream. His interceptor's shields flared and overloaded almost instantly. The kinetic impacts hammered his aircraft's hull like meteors, punching through armor plating that was designed to deflect energy weapons. His interceptor broke apart around him, systems failing in cascading sequence. As his escape pod ejected, Kexthar caught one last glimpse of the human aircraft. It was continuing its attack run as if destroying a Zephyrian interceptor was simply a minor inconvenience. In the facility's command center, Vexthara watched his air superiority evaporate. 3 more interceptors were moving to engage the human aircraft, but he was beginning to understand that they were facing something unprecedented. "Sir," called his intelligence officer, "I'm reading massive kinetic impacts throughout the facility perimeter. The human ground forces are advancing under cover of the air attack." Vexthara pulled up the tactical display. Red indicators marked dozens of breach points along his defensive line. The human special forces had been conducting harassment operations for hours, but now they were launching a coordinated assault. Small teams were advancing on multiple axes, using the air attack as cover to penetrate his outer defenses. What disturbed him most was the coordination. The human forces were operating without detectable communications, yet their timing was perfect. The air attack had begun precisely when it would provide maximum support for the ground assault. It suggested a level of tactical sophistication that contradicted everything Zephyrian intelligence had reported about human military capabilities. "Commander, we're receiving emergency transmissions from the prisoner holding area," reported his communications officer. "Security teams are requesting immediate reinforcement. They report evidence of sabotage in the detention block." The prisoner. Vexthara had almost forgotten about the human scientist. Dr. Mitchell had seemed like a minor intelligence asset, useful for understanding human research capabilities but strategically unimportant. Now he was beginning to suspect that her capture had been the trigger for this entire operation. The humans were mounting a rescue mission for a single civilian scientist. It was tactically insane, risking military assets and personnel for someone with no strategic value. Yet the scale and sophistication of the attack suggested significant resource investment, unless the human scientist wasn't as unimportant as she appeared, or unless human military doctrine placed value on factors that Zephyrian strategic analysis couldn't quantify. "Sir, the human aircraft is beginning another attack run," called the tactical officer, "targeting the communications array." Vexthara watched through the viewing port as the primitive human machine lined up on his communications center. The facility's defensive systems opened fire: energy cannons, particle beam weapons, and automated interceptor drones. The human aircraft flew directly through the defensive fire, absorbing hits that should have destroyed it multiple times over. The GAU-8 cannon fired again, and Vexthara's communications center simply ceased to exist. Tons of metal and electronics were reduced to debris in seconds, cutting the facility's connection to the orbital fleet. He was beginning to understand something that Zephyrian military doctrine had never considered. The humans weren't trying to win through superior technology or tactical brilliance. They were winning through sheer, bloody-minded refusal to accept defeat. Their aircraft was built to survive damage that would destroy more sophisticated machines. Their ground forces operated with coordination that didn't require advanced communication systems. Their pilot continued attacking even when any rational being would have retreated. It was primitive, inefficient, and absolutely unstoppable. Staff Sergeant Chen moved through the Zephyrian facility like a ghost, his team flowing around defensive positions with practiced precision. The alien architecture was all angles and transparent surfaces, designed for maximum visibility and overlapping fields of fire. It should have been impossible to penetrate without massive casualties. But the Zephyrians had made a critical error. They had designed their defenses around energy weapons and technological superiority. They expected enemies to advance with sophisticated equipment, using electronic warfare and coordinated assaults. They weren't prepared for humans who had learned to fight with knives and explosives, moving through blind spots that their sensors couldn't detect. Phoenix's air attack had created exactly the chaos Chen needed. Half the facility's automated defenses were offline, their targeting systems confused by the kinetic impacts that had never been programmed into their threat recognition software. The Zephyrian soldiers were focused on the sky, tracking the A-10's attack runs while ground-based threats moved through their rear areas. "Bravo." "Report," Chen whispered into his throat mic. "Second floor secured," came Rodriguez's voice. 3 guards neutralized. "No casualties, Charlie?" "Perimeter breach confirmed. Explosive charges set on power distribution. Awaiting your signal." Chen smiled grimly as he approached the detention level. The Zephyrians were learning what generations of human enemies had discovered, that sometimes the most advanced technology in the galaxy couldn't compensate for simple tactical superiority. The detention block security station was protected by energy barriers and automated sentries. Under normal circumstances, it would have required heavy weapons or specialized equipment to breach. Instead, Chen pulled a small device from his gear, a shaped charge that belonged in a museum, enhanced with modern materials but operating on principles that were older than spaceflight. The explosion was precisely contained, sending the energy barrier's generators into cascade failure. The automated sentries, programmed to respond to energy weapons and sophisticated threats, couldn't effectively target human soldiers who moved with infantry tactics and carried weapons that predated galactic civilization. Chen stepped through the smoking breach and found Dr. Mitchell waiting for him, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Doctor, I'm Staff Sergeant Chen, United Earth Special Operations. We're here to get you out." Sarah Mitchell had spent 3 days studying Zephyrian reactions in psychology. "Sergeant, I have intelligence that could be crucial for the war effort. The Zephyrians aren't just invading, they're testing human defensive capabilities. This entire operation is reconnaissance for a larger offensive." Chen absorbed this information while continuing to move. Military intelligence could be analyzed later. Right now, his job was getting Dr. Mitchell off this planet alive. "Copy that, Doctor. Right now, we need to focus on extraction. Can you move?" "I can move." "What's the plan?" Chen keyed his comm. "All units, package secured. Beginning exfiltration Route Charlie." Route Charlie was the designation for their worst-case extraction plan. No orbital support, no pickup from friendly forces, and no margin for error. They would have to fight their way to the facility's vehicle bay, acquire Zephyrian transport, and somehow reach the evacuation point where Phoenix could provide close air support. It was insane. It was also the only option they had. As they moved through the facility's corridors, Dr. Mitchell proved that civilian didn't necessarily mean helpless. She stayed close to Chen's shoulder, moved when he moved, and remained silent when he signaled for quiet. More importantly, she provided tactical intelligence about the facility's layout and guard patterns that proved invaluable. "The Zephyrians rotate their guard posts every 2 hours, she whispered as they approached a major intersection. "The next rotation isn't for 40 minutes. But they've been running extra patrols since the air attack started." Chen nodded, processing the information. Dr. Mitchell had done exactly what any good intelligence asset should do. She had observed, analyzed, and prepared useful information for extraction. The mission was becoming less of a rescue and more of an intelligence recovery operation. They reached the vehicle bay without serious contact, though Chen's team had eliminated 6 Zephyrian soldiers along the way. Each engagement had been quick, quiet, and thoroughly one-sided. The aliens were excellent soldiers when fighting conventional battles, but they had no experience with human close-quarters combat techniques. The vehicle bay contained several Zephyrian transport craft, sleek, energy-efficient vehicles designed for rapid movement across varied terrain. Chen examined the closest transport, trying to understand its control systems. "I can operate that," Dr. Mitchell said quietly. "Zephyrian technology follows logical design principles. I've been studying their systems for months. Can you get us to the extraction point?" "Yes, but we'll be moving through hostile territory in an enemy vehicle with no air support except for your pilot. The Zephyrians will be tracking us from the moment we leave this facility." Chen smiled. "Doctor, you're talking to people who specialize in impossible missions. We'll handle the Zephyrians. You just get us where we need to go." As they prepared to board the transport, Chen's earpiece crackled with Phoenix's voice. Ground team, this is Phoenix. I'm reading massive enemy movement converging on your position. Whatever you're planning, you need to do it now. Through the bay's transparent walls, Chen could see Zephyrian forces massing in the jungle around the facility. Interceptor aircraft were circling overhead, and ground vehicles were moving to establish blocking positions on all exit routes. The aliens were finally responding with overwhelming force. It was exactly what Chen had been expecting, and exactly what his team was prepared for. All units, load up. We're going mobile. Chen helped Dr. Mitchell into the transport's pilot position, then took position at the vehicle's rear weapon station. The Zephyrian transport was armed with energy weapons that he didn't fully understand, but the targeting system was intuitive enough. Doctor, can this thing fly? It's primarily a ground effect vehicle, but it can achieve limited atmospheric flight. Why? Chen grinned as he activated the weapon system. Because we're about to find out if Zephyrian engineering is as good as human stubbornness. The transport lifted off from the vehicle bay, rising into an atmosphere filled with enemy aircraft and hostile fire. Dr. Mitchell proved to be an excellent pilot, threading the vehicle between energy blasts while Chen returned fire with weapons he was learning to use in real time. Above them, Phoenix's A-10 dove through the Zephyrian interceptor formation, her cannon creating corridors of destruction that allowed the transport to maneuver toward the extraction point. For the first time in the mission, Chen allowed himself to believe they might actually succeed. Phoenix felt her A-10 shudder as another plasma burst found its mark, this time taking out her starboard engine. Warning lights cascaded across her instrument panel, but the aircraft continued flying. The Thunderbolt had been designed by engineers who understood that sometimes staying in the fight was more important than staying pretty. Below her, she could see Chen's team racing across the alien landscape in their captured transport, weaving between energy blasts from pursuing Zephyrian vehicles. The extraction point was still 15 kilometers away, and enemy reinforcements were converging from 3 directions. Ground team, this is Phoenix, she transmitted. I count 12 enemy aircraft and at least 20 ground vehicles moving to intercept. You've got company coming fast. Chen's voice crackled back through the comm. Copy, Phoenix. Can you clear us a path? Phoenix checked her ammunition counter. The GAU-8 was down to its last 200 rounds, and she had expended most of her missiles during the facility attack. Against a dozen interceptors and 20 ground vehicles, it should have been hopeless, but Phoenix had learned something important. During her years of flying the A-10, sometimes the most effective weapon wasn't the one that could destroy the most targets, it was the one that could stay in the fight long enough to complete the mission. Ground team, recommend you take the eastern route through the canyon system. I'll keep the interceptors busy. She pulled into a steep climb, drawing the Zephyrian aircraft away from the transport. The interceptors followed, their pilots eager to finally destroy the primitive human aircraft that had caused so much damage. They were faster than the A-10, more maneuverable, and equipped with superior weapons. What they didn't have was patience. Phoenix led them into the planet's upper atmosphere, where the thin air reduced their maneuverability advantage. The Zephyrian pilots, accustomed to clean, efficient victories, became frustrated as their energy weapons struggled to find decisive hits on the heavily armored human aircraft. She waited until they committed to a coordinated attack pattern, then dove back toward the surface, using the planet's gravity well to build velocity. The Zephyrian interceptors followed, maintaining their formation as they pursued her through the atmosphere. At 5,000 meters, Phoenix executed a maneuver that would have been suicide in any other aircraft. She pulled the A-10 into a vertical climb, bleeding off airspeed until she was virtually stationary in the air. The Zephyrian interceptors, moving at high velocity, overshot her position and found themselves perfectly positioned for what human pilots called a turkey shoot. Phoenix rolled inverted and fired her remaining GAU-8 rounds in a controlled burst, sending depleted uranium rounds through the formation of interceptors. 3 alien aircraft disintegrated immediately, their pilots never understanding what had happened. The remaining interceptors scattered, their formation broken and their tactical advantage lost. But Phoenix's victory came at a cost. Her remaining engine was running rough, and her hydraulic systems were failing. The A-10 was tough, but it wasn't invincible. She had maybe 10 minutes of flight time before the aircraft became unflyable. Ground team, this is Phoenix. Path is clear, but I'm running on fumes. You need to reach extraction now. On the surface, Dr. Mitchell pushed the Zephyrian transport to its maximum velocity, skimming across the alien landscape at altitudes that would have terrified a sane pilot. The Eastern Canyon system provided natural cover from the remaining enemy aircraft, but it also channeled them toward a series of natural choke points where Zephyrian ground forces could establish ambush positions. "Contact front," called Rodriguez from the transport's forward position. Enemy vehicles blocking the canyon mouth approximately 2 kilometers ahead. Chen studied the tactical display, calculating distances and ammunition remaining. His team was down to their last magazines, and the transport's energy weapons were operating at reduced capacity after taking damage during their escape from the facility. "Doctor, how much altitude can this thing achieve?" Sarah checked the transport systems. "Maybe 500 meters above ground level. Why?" "Because we're going to fly over them." It was a desperate plan, but Chen had learned that desperate situations sometimes called for desperate solutions. The Zephyrian ground vehicles were positioned to control the canyon floor, their weapons oriented horizontally to engage surface targets. They wouldn't be expecting an attack from directly above. The transport climbed steeply, its engines straining against the planet's gravity. Below them, the Zephyrian ambush position came into view. 6 heavily armed vehicles positioned across the canyon mouth, with infantry support dug in among the rocks. Chen opened fire with the transport's dorsal weapons, sending energy bursts into the enemy formation while Dr. Mitchell held the aircraft steady, despite incoming fire. The Zephyrian soldiers, caught completely off guard by an attack from above, scrambled to reposition their weapons for anti-aircraft engagement. But it was too late. Chen's team had already passed over the ambush position and was diving toward the extraction point. Behind them, Phoenix's A-10 made one final attack run, using her last few cannon rounds to suppress the enemy ground forces. The extraction point was a clearing in the jungle where the UES Defiance could briefly break stealth protocol to retrieve the team. It was a calculated risk. The moment the frigate dropped its cloaking systems, every Zephyrian sensor in the system would detect its position. "Defiance, this is ground team," Chen transmitted, approaching extraction point with package. "Request immediate pickup." "Ground team, this is Defiance actual," came Commander Hayes' voice. "We have multiple enemy signals converging on your position. Pickup window is 60 seconds maximum." 60 seconds. Chen looked at his team, at Dr. Mitchell, and at the alien landscape rushing past their transport. They had started this mission as a simple rescue operation. It had become something much more important, a demonstration that human military forces could operate successfully against superior technology and overwhelming odds. But demonstrations were meaningless if they didn't survive. "To report their success, Doctor." "Take us down, fast." Sarah Mitchell dove the transport toward the extraction point, using every trick she had learned about Zephyrian technology to squeeze maximum performance from the alien aircraft. Below them, the jungle canopy rushed up with alarming speed. At the last possible moment, she pulled the transport level and set it down hard in the clearing. Chen and his team were moving before the vehicle had fully stopped, providing security while Dr. Mitchell shut down the systems. Above them, space began to shimmer as the UES Defiance dropped its stealth systems and activated emergency transport protocols. The frigate materialized in the planet's atmosphere, its hull already glowing from atmospheric friction. "Move, move, move," Chen shouted, guiding his team toward the transport beam that had locked onto their position. As they dematerialized, Chen caught one last glimpse of Phoenix's A-10, limping through the sky on failing engines. The aircraft that had saved their mission was dying, but its pilot was still flying, still fighting, still refusing to give up. It was the most human thing he had ever seen. 6 months later, Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood before the Galactic Council on the neutral station Harmony Point, delivering her testimony about the Zephyrian invasion of Kepler 442b. The chamber was vast and impressive, with representatives from dozens of species arranged in ascending tiers around the central speaking platform. The Altarian ambassador, his crystalline features reflecting the chamber's soft lighting, spoke with the measured tones of a species that had dominated galactic politics for millennia. "Dr. Mitchell, your report suggests that human military forces achieved tactical success against a technologically superior enemy through what you term asymmetric warfare. Please elaborate on these primitive tactics," Sarah smiled, remembering Staff Sergeant Chen's words during their debriefing. The aliens still didn't understand what they had witnessed, Honored Ambassador, I believe the term primitive reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of human military doctrine. What the Council considers primitive, we consider adaptable. The Vorthon representative, a tall humanoid with silver skin and large black eyes, leaned forward. Dr. Mitchell, our analysis of the engagement indicates that human forces achieved success through inefficient expenditure of resources and acceptance of unacceptable casualty rates. This is hardly a sustainable military strategy. Actually, Counselor, human casualties were zero. All personnel involved in the operation survived and have returned to active duty. Sarah pulled up the mission reports on the chamber's holographic display. Staff Sergeant Chen and SEAL Team 7 are currently training other special operations units in what we call Zephyrian-specific tactics. Lieutenant Torres has been promoted and is developing new close air support protocols for asymmetric environments. A murmur ran through the chamber. The concept of zero casualties in a military operation against superior forces was difficult for most galactic species to comprehend. Their warfare was based on calculated exchanges of losses, acceptable casualty rates, and strategic resource management. The Keeper representative, ancient even by the standards of his long-lived species, spoke with the weight of millennia behind his words. Young human, you describe tactics that appear to prioritize individual survival over strategic objectives. How is this militarily sound? Sarah had spent months preparing for this question. Honored Keeper, human military doctrine is based on a principle that most species find difficult to understand. We believe that every individual life has strategic value that cannot be calculated through standard military analysis. Staff Sergeant. Chen's team risked significant resources to rescue a single civilian scientist because human culture places absolute value on not abandoning our people. But surely, interjected the Altarian ambassador, such sentiment is a luxury that cannot be sustained in large-scale warfare. On the contrary, Sarah replied, activating another section of her presentation. The psychological impact of the Kepler 442b operation has been profound. Zephyrian expansion has slowed significantly in this sector. Intelligence reports suggest they are developing new defensive doctrines, specifically to counter human tactical approaches. Most importantly, 17 different species have requested joint training exercises with human special operations forces. The chamber fell silent. Sarah could see the representatives processing this information, trying to understand how a single small-scale operation could have such wide-reaching strategic implications. Commander Vexithera, present as part of the Zephyrian delegation under diplomatic immunity, rose to speak. His blue-scaled features were carefully neutral, but Sarah could see the wariness in his posture. The human doctor speaks of psychological impact, but she fails to mention that Zephyrian forces withdrew from Kepler 442b through strategic redeployment, not defeat. Sarah nodded respectfully. Commander Vexithera is correct. Zephyrian forces conducted an orderly withdrawal after achieving their primary reconnaissance objectives. However, I would note that the withdrawal occurred within 72 hours of our extraction and included the evacuation of their entire forward operating base. What she didn't say, but what everyone in the chamber understood, was that the Zephyrians had abandoned a strategically valuable planet after a single engagement with a 4-person human team. The implications were staggering. The Vorthon representative consulted his data tablet. Dr. Mitchell, our technical analysis of the engagement indicates that human weapons technology is significantly inferior to galactic standard. How do you explain the tactical success? Counselor, I believe the question reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of human military philosophy. We don't seek to match our enemies' technological capabilities. We seek to make their technological advantages irrelevant. Sarah activated a new holographic display showing the A-10 specifications. Lieutenant Torres's aircraft is over 2 centuries old by human standards. By galactic standards, it's practically a museum piece. But it was designed according to principles that most species have forgotten: simplicity, survivability, and effectiveness. The Altarian ambassador studied the technical specifications with obvious confusion. Dr. Mitchell, this aircraft has no energy shielding, minimal sensor capabilities, and uses kinetic projectile weapons. How could such primitive technology be effective against modern defenses? Because, Ambassador, modern defenses are designed to counter modern threats. The Zephyrians had sophisticated countermeasures for energy weapons, electronic warfare, and coordinated fleet actions. They had no defenses against a pilot who had trained to fight while wounded, navigate without instruments, and complete missions in damaged aircraft. Sarah paused, letting that information settle. The same principle applied to our ground operations. SEAL Team 7 used tactics that predate galactic civilization: small unit infiltration, close quarters combat, and psychological warfare. These aren't primitive techniques. They're fundamental approaches that remain effective regardless of technological advancement. The Keeper representative spoke again, his ancient voice carrying undertones of respect. Young human, you suggest that your species has developed military capabilities specifically designed to counter technological superiority. This implies significant strategic foresight. Honored Keeper, humanity learned early in our development that we would rarely have the most advanced technology or the largest armies. We learned to fight with what we had, to adapt to any environment, and to never give up. Sarah gestured to the mission report still displayed on the chamber's screens. Staff Sergeant Chen's team succeeded, not because they had superior equipment, but because they had superior determination. As the session concluded, Sarah reflected on the broader implications of her testimony. The galactic community was beginning to understand that humanity brought something unique to interstellar politics. Not just technological innovation or resource potential, but a fundamentally different approach to conflict resolution. Other species fought wars to achieve strategic objectives with acceptable losses. Humans fought wars to protect their people with zero acceptable losses. It was a distinction that changed everything about how military operations were planned and executed. 6 months ago, the Galactic Council had viewed humanity as a junior species with interesting but limited potential. Today, they were requesting joint military exercises and asking for advice on asymmetric warfare tactics. The rescue mission on Kepler 442b had been successful beyond Chen's wildest expectations. They had saved Dr. Mitchell, gathered crucial intelligence about Zephyrian capabilities, and demonstrated human military effectiveness on a galactic stage. But most importantly, they had proven that sometimes the most advanced technology in the galaxy was no match for a small team of humans who simply refused to leave anyone behind. As Sarah left the council chamber, she received a message from Staff Sergeant Chen. SEAL Team 7 had been assigned to a new mission, training Allied forces in human tactical doctrine. The message included a single line that made her smile. The SEALs are no longer waiting in silence. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity could accomplish when they decided to make some noise.